Hey guys, what's going on? last person who knew what the fuck he was doing. I went, okay, that's perfect. No. But, I saw that poster you have up. You have up here in your...
Which one?
The Lenny Bruce Without Tears.
Oh, yeah.
And, the idea of walking... I mean, and I looked... I was whatever I was, 10 or 11 when Lenny Bruce died. And... But, I didn't ever hear him until after he was dead. And you're younger than me, so even more so for you. But I did not go to college, but I would hitchhike up to the college that was nearby when I was in high school, which was UMass and all that, Amherst College. Yeah. And because I'm from a little dead factory town north of there. And I remember seeing Lenny Bruce Without Tears. They showed that as a film on the college campus.
Wow.
I think I'm remembering this right. Like we know our memories are wrong, but I saw the film very early, and it was completely life-changing for me. The idea that stand-up comedy was going to go from what to me was the Smothers Brothers to somebody actually talking from their heart in a way that made people laugh, but who cared? And, of course, then Andy Kaufman turns that entirely inside out. But the idea that form was created, created here in the U.S. when you went from being a Parkakakis, Albert Brooks's father doing the Greek dialect, and even throw in Amos and Andy and all of those people that did jokes and character stuff. And then all of a sudden a guy coming out as himself and talking about his real life is just mind-blowing to me. And so the idea that instead of doing parody, being able to get your laughs stating what you believe. And maybe that means people are laughing at you, and maybe that's okay.
Yeah, it's definitely okay, but I don't think there's anything wrong with any way to do it. I think there's nothing wrong with Abbott and Costello. It's...
I was having a talk with Gilbert, Gilbert Gottfried, and we were talking. We said, in Laurel and Hardy, Stan Laurel was the brains, and in the Three Stooges, Moe was the brains. And in the Marx Brothers, Groucho was the brains. And Abbott and Costello had no brains. That total, you want to talk about the Stooges being anarchy.
Yeah.
The Abbott and Costello are just completely off the map.
Yeah. But
just really.
For the time, though, it was groundbreaking. It's hard for us to wrap our head around, as was Cheech and Chong. Cheech and Chong for the time was groundbreaking. I know it has to do with drugs and for
me, I was on a different team at that time. But I've gone back, and that stuff is good. And of course, but I'm also a liar because I was crazy for Firesign Theater and memorizing everything. And Phil Proctor is still a good friend of mine, and that was very much drug-based.
I think that comedy is like music in that there's a whole bunch of different ways to do it. And if you were a big fan of Bruce Springsteen and you went to see Bruce Springsteen but Run DMC showed up instead, you'd be furious. You'd be like, what the fuck is this? But obviously, people love Run DMC. It's a different way to do a thing. It's a different way to express yourself,
and a way to learn.
Yeah,
a way to learn when you get pushed out of there. But it's just that whole idea that you've got to my life is so heavily affected by drugs, even though I had this whole, I'm not going to do any drugs.
Why did you have that decision?
I don't know. That's always, I've talked about this on my podcast forever.
How old are you now?
What's that?
How old are you now?
I'm 64 years old.
And you have no experience with drugs other than
none.
medication, surgery. Right?
Sure. I mean, yes, and I've had deep enough injuries that I have experienced.
You just keep
morphine.
Getting surgery because you love drugs.
Exactly.
Like excuse.
Well, Trey Parker.
Hello, friends. How's everybody
doing this for any sort of animal? Sex Pistol Sorry. There's a good friend of mine. And that was
whine, and you're very articulate, and people like to hear you talk. So you just can talk, and you can take over. You could overrun things, and you can make an argument that people just go, all right. Okay, and they step back, and that's good if you're trying to win an argument, but sometimes it's bad to take in ideas. And I remember when I had that conversation.
Exactly right.
Thank you. When I had that conversation with you, I remember saying, I'm going to revisit this someday, and one day I want to get Penn fucked up on mushrooms.
Yeah.
That's what I remember thinking. Like, it might be a good thing for, well, the best thing for you would be something that doesn't take very long, just so you can, like, DMT is the best one because it takes like 15 minutes. And it's over. And then your body brings it back to baseline almost immediately. So you literally travel to another dimension, and then you're back, and you don't have to worry about any overdosing because it's an endogenous chemical. Your body knows exactly what to do with it. It's one of the quickest chemicals that your body can break down and bring back to baseline.
In my defense, from the very beginning of my not doing drugs, which is an odd kind of baseline there, I always left the door open for psychedelics in the heart. What I disliked the most was wine with dinner.
Really?
I disliked the most social kind of lubrication.
Wine with dinner is amazing.
I'm doing this in past tense. That's where I always was, and I always left open the possibility of some of the more intense stuff.
Wine with dinner is a delicious drug. It's one of the rare delicious drugs. Like, I like whiskey, but let's be honest, it tastes like shit. It's weird. You're drinking this stuff, like, woo! Like, it's got kind of a good flavor, but it's like, it's harsh. You can't drink it. Like, it can't fuck with Kool-Aid. Kool-Aid tastes way better than whiskey, right? Kool-Aid's cheap. You just mix it up. It tastes delicious. It's way better tasting. But wine has a delicious taste that you can enjoy.
Here's my problem. One of my many problems. We'll detail more than one.
Okay.
But I have no skill at moderation. I'm 64 years old, and I've never been able to do anything with moderation. So I think if you told me we're going to do acid for the rest of our lives every single day, you could make that argument. The idea for me that's hard, like I said, when I said I was meditated, I haven't missed a day.
Maybe you should microdose.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
We could give you a little right now, just a little spray.
You do microdosing sprays?
Yeah,
I'm not going to do it now.
No?
I want to think about it a little bit before it, although it would be pretty boss.
You tell me when. I'll open the box.
You got the box right there.
I got a box right here.
Yeah. So, how often do you? I was gonna answer that question. I have a zillion answers to why I've never done drugs, and none of them are, of course, true because we don't have access to that stuff that we really do. But my parents and my whole family in back generations, teetotalers. So there was never alcohol in the house, ever. I never saw my parents take a drink. When it was on TV, it was a totally different thing. It just didn't happen. They never preached about it. They never said, don't drink. They never said, don't do drugs. It just never was in the house. And that statistically has a huge effect on people. And then the first people I fell madly in love with, Lenny Bruce, Jimi Hendrix, had been, in my mind, killed by drugs. And I kind of said, ooh, people that have this kind of personality, when they get into drugs, they sometimes have trouble. And I think that maybe being 19 years old and trying to get into show business, that maybe being the sober one allowed the dumber guy to do a little better, as everybody else kind of got out of my way, as they were fucked up some of the time, I could get other stuff done. And then that starts reinforcing. But that may no longer be valid.
Well, there are drugs. I mean, I've never done coke. And one of the reasons why I never did coke, and I've talked about this many times, my friend growing up, his cousin used to sell it, and I watched his life fall apart. They were just doing coke all the time and lost a lot of weight and looked like a vampire. It was very strange. They just hung out in their attic apartment. It was really weird. And I remember thinking, fuck coke. It was like a guy I know got bit by a monster, and was infected with something.
Yeah, the people that I've met on coke, not pleasant.
Not good. It's not, and I think that's also, one of the accusations against Trump, that he's on some sort of speed, which is why he's so inexhaustible, and also why he has this inability to be affected by criticism in terms of there's no self-reflection.
No shame.
Right. No shame, no self-reflection. And that's something that is a symptom of people that are on speed, and this is the Adderall generation that we're living in. goddamn, there's so many fucking people that are on Adderall.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so goddamn common. You know, I was having this conversation the other day, and someone was telling me about this guy they know who's really brilliant, but he won't stop. He's got ADHD, and you know he just can't stop, and he won't stop talking, and this and that. And I'm waiting. I'm just waiting while this person's talking to me. I go, he's on Adderall. And they go, yeah, he is. It's a medication. I go, no. It's fucking speed. That guy's on speed, okay? And you can call it a medication because you can buy it at the pharmacy. But that fucking guy's on speed all day long, every day. And there is a giant number of people in this country that are medicated and that are on speed all the time.
That's that great Andy Warhol quote, which was in the 60s, we thought we were getting to know people, but we were getting to know drugs. You know, there is definitely a personality type that we think is an individual that actually does seem to have a tie-in with.
It's fucking Adderall mindset. There's a speed mindset, and it's a go, 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 get everything done, more, bigger, faster, accumulate shit. I'm the fucking man. I'm the fucking man. Like that. That's a speed mindset. It's a dangerous mindset. It's a real weird one, and it's not one that laughs at itself. It's not one that self-deprecates. It's all me, 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 me. I'm the shit. And that's what you get out of Trump. I mean, there's a guy who's a journalist who wrote a story about how he knows the very Duane Reade pharmacy in Manhattan where Trump was getting diet pills way back in the day, where he was supposed to take it for like 6 weeks. He took it for years. And this guy is saying, like, this is what you're dealing with. Like, many people have called him the Adderall president. Like, this is entire. It absolutely could be that he's on something.
That all that we're talking about this whole time is just speed.
Yeah. I mean, and it gives him the energy to look. Remember when he was running for president? I'm like, how the fuck is this guy not tired? I get tired if I tour and do stand up. When I do stand up, it's an hour, 20 minutes of my own routine that I wrote myself. I'm hanging out with friends. I do 2 shows a night, and I'm like, woo, this motherfucker's touring, flying around in jets all over the country, just inexhausted, just no fucking script, just goes on stage in front of everybody, just ranting and raving about China and the economy and build the wall. And, well, all right, we're going to go to Ohio. And then off to the jet eating Kentucky Fried Chicken and fucking flies into Ohio, and he does it again. I mean, who the fuck at 70 has that kind of energy? People on speed. I don't know if it's true. I might be wrong. I might be wrong, but it seems like it. It seems like all the pieces are in place. And there was a psychologist who did an analysis of all the various psychological traits that people who are on amphetamines have. And they compared it to Trump. And like all of them, megalomania, all of the various psychological characteristics, inability to accept criticism, you know, this thinking that everyone's against them, this delusions of grandeur, all these different things.
Well, there was a guy that was on Apprentice who talked about him doing these kind of drugs. It was a news story, but it was like an intern that we weren't going to just kind of faded away after that. But it's a nutty theory.
Tom Arnold claims Donald Trump snorted Adderall on The Apprentice set. Okay, well, I know Tom. He's crazy. I love you, Tom, but I don't know.
Yeah,
maybe he did, but Tom Arnold would say that he snorted coke just to piss Trump off.
Yeah,
he would say that just because I'm fucking with him, I'm getting under his skin. You know, maybe he did snort Adderall. I don't know.
I don't know. It doesn't seem like that it's the kind of thing he would snort. It seemed like he would pretend that it was medicinal.
Yeah, he'd take a pill.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of medicinal. Here's the thing. It will allow you to get more things done. You know, we had a guy in here who wrote a book on Hunter Thompson. And one of the things he was talking about was that he needs Adderall to write. And I was going into it with him because one of the things, a dirty little secret about journalism, is a tremendous amount of journalists are on Adderall. A tremendous amount, like an enormous amount. Like one of my friends who's a pretty legit...
Do we know how much Adderall is going into the USA?
That's a good question. How many Adderall prescriptions were made in 2018? Let's just find that out. But my friend, who's a legit journalist for legit publications, said you would be stunned. And he goes, it's an enormous percentage.
Well,
it's the vast majority.
They just started banging it out. Like they did with fentanyl, the vets, to children. They just bang out Adderall under. And what's the other one?
Prozac.
No, the other one they do for, I guess, for attention deficit
disorder. Is another one other than Adderall?
Is it all just Adderall? Maybe
Prozac, Adderall. I know Prozac. Prozac was, they put my neighbor's kid on Prozac. It was fucking horrific.
Seems low. 16 million adults or prescriptions were filled.
16 million adults had prescriptions filled?
Yeah.
Mm,
and
that's low.
400,000 abuse it, which seems low also. So
16 million?
Yeah, what is that, like 3%?
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems low. Less than 4%? Something like that?
Yeah, I don't know. It seems very low.
That was last year?
2012 is the last.
Oh,
most
2012.
number I can find. I did
No,
check
no, no, no,
2017,
no.
but
That's a million years ago,
I know
bro.
It's not showing up.
Maybe that was
way more
true for
recently.
2012. I think it probably was true for 2012. I think we live in a whole new world now. And I don't think it's anywhere near 4% or 5%, whatever the fuck the real number is. I bet it's about 10. I bet it's 10% of people in this country are on Adderall, if I had to guess. I bet it's around 30 million. I bet it's around there.
I don't know.
I'm not, I wouldn't be shocked. I know a bunch of people that are on it. A bunch. And, you know, some people tell me they have to take it. That's what my favorite one is. I have to take it. I don't take it. What happens? You die? You disappear? What happens if you don't take it? It's fucking speed, man. You know, like, and a lot of the people that take it, they're not healthy otherwise. Like, they're not exercising, they're not drinking a lot of water, they're not meditating, they're not eating healthy foods. Like, why do you need that? Like, what happens if you get rid of all that other stuff? Like, cut out the shitty food, cut out all the sugar, start drinking water, no booze. Let's get you exercising 3 times a week. Let me see if you really need that Adderall shit.
Yeah.
How many vitamins do you take? Do you take vitamins? Do you eat healthy? Are you drinking fruit juice and vegetable juice? What kind of nutrients are you taking into your system, man? And you're wondering why you don't have any fucking energy? So you're just pouring jet fuel into your tank and lighting the whole fucking thing on fire. But on the other hand is like things get done when you take speed. You know, what we were talking about Hitler the other day that
Why wouldn't you be?
why wouldn't we be? We were talking about who were we talking about? Was it with Fahim? I don't remember. But we were talking about how Hitler there was a time where Hitler had come back from something and he was supposed to meet Mussolini and he was like physically exhausted. So his doctor injected him with a combination of steroids and liquid cocaine. And he was just fucking filled with energy. He's like, give me another one. And the guy's like, no, I can't give you another. He's like, fucking give me another one. And he gave him another one. And then he went to Mussolini and ranted at Mussolini, just fucking talked at him for 5 hours. And Mussolini just never got a word in edgewise. And apparently Mussolini's plan was to talk to Hitler and go, hey, man, Italy wants to get the fuck out of this. We're not really interested in it. And Hitler's like, and just fucking going crazy for 5 hours, sweating like a pig because he was on fucking coke. He was on coke and steroids. They just pumped him up with it.
Maybe it's best to stay away from some drugs.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. But, I mean, it's amazing how much productivity gets done because of caffeine, right? Now, what is caffeine? Caffeine is a very mild stimulant in terms of, you know, compared to Adderall or things along those lines. But it is a fucking drug. And it's a drug. There's a goddamn drugstore on every corner. Everyone's buying it. It's in every gas station. Everyone's fueling up. You got to fuel up early
caffeine,
morning.
you know, I drink decaffeinated coffee, which means I drink 5% of what, right? You know, I can drink 8 cups of coffee and it makes a
Do you just like the
quarter
taste?
cup. I don't like the taste, but I like the social stuff. I like having a hot, bitter thing in front of me.
Why don't you just have tea?
I'd have tea too.
Yeah, just like herbal.
I
something
nervously drink. It's
Mm.
a habit, like, you know, like some people smoke. I like to have seltzer. I like to have decaf coffee or decaf tea or something like that.
Yeah, I like seltzer too. It makes me feel like I'm doing something rather than drinking water.
Mhm.
You know, like I like sparkling water.
It's water with
Yeah,
entertainment.
I like sparkling water with a little lime. Ooh, I got a drink here. I got a nice little
Exactly.
drink.
Or you know what? You take decaffeinated espresso, and then you pour carbonated water on top of that, and then you've got bitter, bubbly. You're drinking a potion.
You want that?
You want a potion?
A potion makes you feel like an adult.
Yeah, it makes you feel like a grown up.
This isn't Kool-Aid. This is an adult
Well,
beverage.
exactly. And when you're a non-drinker of alcohol,
Yeah.
you have to work very hard to look like you're drinking like an adult.
Yeah. So you've never fucked with alcohol at all? No wine,
Never.
no
Nope.
nothing,
Nope.
nothing.
I mean,
Tried it.
okay, I know I'm talking to someone who pays attention. So you can say that there is alcohol in vanilla. There's alcohol in things like that. So you can't say none. But none
Not
that I
psychoactive.
never went to searched out.
It feels good sometimes.
And never even accidentally. No one ever even, fuck with me on that.
Really? Well, that's good.
That's surprising.
Yeah. That is surprising, given the circles you travel in.
Yeah.
I would imagine eventually someone would be like, enough is enough. Get this guy fucked up.
This would be funny. Yeah, this would be really funny. Yeah. It seems like someone that would have fit in someone's sense of humor.
Some great
Oh,
work.
who knows? This may be the day.
No, I
I'm
wouldn't do that
drinking
to
your
you.
water.
If you really want to say the word, we'll open up the box of doom.
You box it too.
Yeah.
How often do you do
Psychedelics?
Yeah, psychedelics.
Not that often. A couple times a year.
Oh,
I could
really?
get we did mushrooms on a podcast a couple months ago, but that was a small dose. But the tank is my friend.
I tried
sensory
that. Let's talk
deprivation
about
tank.
the
Please.
sensory tank.
I have one right here.
Yeah.
I have one your size.
I
You can
went,
get in it.
yeah. I went to one of these places where you pay them X amount of money and you go in because my buddy Tim Jennison, we did a movie called Tim's Vermeer where he painted a Vermeer in his garage, and Tim was really into that. I'll do anything Tim does. I just love Tim, and so I went and whenever you pay a few bucks and you go in and float in the tank, and I was so ready. This happens so much in my life. I get so ready for a major change in my life. The first time I wanted to become a vegan, I went out with a friend. This was like in 1990. And it was a guy I was making fun of brutally, ripping him the fuck apart for his stupid eating, And I said, listen, I want to go out with you to a restaurant, just eat vegetables. And I'm not going to interrupt you. I'm not going to make fun of you. You talk to me for 3 hours about all your Peter Singer stuff, all your ethical vegetarian stuff, and you convert me. That's all I want you to do.
Oh.
That was the reason I went out. That was the reason I went out with him. And I finished up the whole evening and I went, I really respected your point of view until I understood it. And motherfucker talked me out of doing what I wanted to do. And so I got ready, man, with the isolation tank. I said, this will be good. He's telling me about this. I'm just going to go there, sensory deprivation. I'll just let my mind wander. And I went in there and it was just salty and I was bumping against walls.
Yeah. You need to get used to it. It's like the meditation. Try meditating once. You're like, I couldn't concentrate.
Yeah, meditating once is useless.
Yes. Yeah. It's
How often do you do the tank?
all the time. I used to have one in my
Well,
house.
you're not in it now.
No, not all times, but often, I should say. I used to have one in my house, and now I just have it here. But it's a very valuable tool.
And you
me.
meditate as well.
Yeah, I meditate. I like to meditate before shows. I've been doing a lot more lately. But the tank is a great place to meditate as well because it's meditation squared. It's meditation without any external stimulation. So I can climb in there and
And do you follow breathing rules and stuff you would do on normal? What kind of meditation do you do when you meditate? And do you do it every day?
What I've been doing lately is all I do is concentrate on my breath. Other things get in there, but I just say breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. And I just concentrate on long, slow, rhythmic breaths. And I get myself into this weird state. And this will come in. Oh, you got a fucking low front tire. You gotta get that filled. Oh, you need your inspection sticker, and the bullshit comes in. But I just breathe in, breathe out, force it out, it out. And after 5 or 10 minutes of this, I can get to a nice state where I can just keep doing it. But in the tank, it's very accentuated because in the tank, I don't have to think about my butt in the seat, my hands on the table. I don't have to think about anything else. I'm just lying there. What you're experiencing when you're talking about bumping into the walls, that's just a technique thing. When you lie in it, right, you get into the tank. First of all, you need a big tank. You're a giant guy. There's a lot of those little pods. Those are barely big enough for me. It's for a guy like you. You need a large one. And you lie down in the tank, and then you put your hand on one wall and your hand on the other wall, and you let the water still. Because there's going to be a lot of little ripples when you're floating because you're so buoyant. There's 1,000 pounds of Epsom salts in there, and you're floating. And it's easy to just kind of bounce back and forth. So you put your hands there till they steady, and then once the ripples kind of stop, then you slowly bring your hands down. And then when you slowly bring your hands down, you do it really slow so you're not making any ripples. And then lay there. And then you could be in the exact same position for hours. And that's how – it's a technique. You have to center yourself.
How long do
in the
you
middle of
do?
the tank. 2 hours is what I like. I'll do an hour if I'm in a rush, and I have
although rushing
tape
through
recorder.
it is.
Yeah, I mean it's not a rush.
Yeah.
It's just an hour. But if I can't spend any more time than an hour, but I have a tape recorder that's voice activated and it's Velcro, And so I can stick it up inside the thing. So if I have an idea, which I do sometimes I have this temptation, fuck, I got to get out of here. I got to write this down. I can just say it, and the tape recorder will pick it up.
Have there been brilliant stuff you said?
No, nothing. I've never used it once, but it's there.
You haven't gotten out of the tank and had satisfaction?
No,
you know that Keith Richards thing, right? No, but he went to sleep.
Really?
He had this sound-activated recorder that he got by the side of the bed and his guitar, and he went to sleep one night, woke up the next morning, there on the tape recorder, there was some voice activation in the night. He played it. It was satisfaction.
My friend
You haven't gotten that yet?
No, I haven't had that yet. My friend works at a school in Connecticut where his kids go, where Keith Richards' kids go.
Mm-hmm.
And Keith Richards will ride on a bike to school with a fucking bandana on. And, like, my friend's like, holy shit, that's Keith Richards. Like, he's just kind of hanging around with normal people. And he said it freaks you out. When you see him, you're like, what? That's fucking Keith Richards? He just hangs out. Just like, he's a giant superstar, but he drifts into the real world. And it just freaks people out.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I only met Keith Richards in groups of people. I mean, wasn't really like bicycling into your. Yeah. But still, it's so amazing,
surreal,
so
right?
surreal. So
He's an epic human.
Yeah, he is.
The voice recorder thing is new. That's why I haven't had any new. It's a new idea that I have because there's times that I did.
But the
have
solution
to
this team thing and the separation of America and getting more polarized, that's going to be solved by Joe in the tank at some point. We can count on that?
No.
Now that you got the recorder?
I think we're going to solve it ourselves. I think we're going to solve it ourselves through just time. I think as we're getting back to Pinker, we were talking about Pinker earlier, that he gets so much shit for saying that things are better now than ever. It doesn't dismiss horrific acts that take place or terrible things.
And it doesn't say that the battle is over.
Right. No.
I mean, this is one of the things that I would push in my little microcosm, push for so hard in Penn and Teller. Teller and I would have real trouble just crossing a finish line. I would just say to him, Teller, we've done 5 seasons of bullshit, and it went well. Let's go out, the two of us, have coffee and donuts. And let's just say, wow, we did that. And then push ahead for the next thing. And I just think that Pinker is like that with me. Pinker's like saying, human beings, we're doing okay. We're doing okay. We've done some really good things. Now let's get back to work.
We're most certainly doing better than ever before. And I think that's an accumulative thing. It's like,
if we don't blow everything to Kingdom Come, if we don't destroy the environment, if those two things, the two enormous ifs, we're in very good shape.
They are.
The thing that blew my mind about Pinker in that book, Better Angels, blew my mind is there's this line that's been obsessing me with a Cracker in Teen Angst. I don't know what the world may need, but I sure as hell know it starts with me, and that's a wisdom I've laughed at. All this shit that I've laughed at that turns out to be true for me now, it just makes me smile and fills me with joy. Early part of the 20th century, all these authors and artists and all these guys were saying, Hemingway and stuff, we're going to stop war by writing about war and writing about how bad it was, and we're going to give empathy for other people, and we'll understand this, and we're going to really, with our art, make an effort to make humanity better. What a jack-off bullshit thing to do. I mean, can you imagine something more that's just twiddling your dick than saying that, I'm going to do art, I'm going to write, and it's going to change the world.
My poetry.
And then Pinker's book says, why is all this stuff getting better so fast? We think it may be art, and it may be empathy. And it turns out that all this stuff people were saying about, we can change how people see warfare and how people see one another. And that's what scares me so much about how some people speak of, and I think it's because I don't understand it. Usually when I'm against something, it means I don't understand it. But when they talk about cultural appropriation seems to me to be the greatest thing you can possibly do. To see the world through the eyes of someone who grew up differently than you, to even try to do that, for us to pretend, right now to be a white nationalist. Even trying to do that seems like it's a really good thing for us.
To pretend, just to get into their head?
Just to try to fantasize what it's like to be, for instance, a African-American transgender man. If we try to do that, we're writing a piece of art, and we try to see ourselves from that point of view. Not ourselves. See the world from that point of view. That seems like nothing but healthy. It seems like that takes you out of your identification.
Well, I think there's a lot of what we're calling cultural appropriation that is really people trying to tell other people what to do. Because people enjoy telling people they can't do that anymore and getting angry at those people. They enjoy it. They enjoy pushing buttons. People, you give them a rock and a window, they want to throw that rock through the window. It's a natural part of being a person. Yeah. And if you see a girl with hoop earrings, like, bitch, take those earrings off. Those are for Latinos, or those are for this, or those are for that. I mean, and the argument is so often not even based historically, like the earring thing. Like, fuck, man, what are you, from Sumer? Like, that's the oldest known hoop earrings. Like, are you from Babylon?
It's also what, I don't know if this is not Pinker, this is Noah Harari, who talks about, when you're talking about cultural stuff, how far back you going.
Right.
I mean, there are no tomatoes in Italy.
Right.
You know,
sure.
Tomatoes are not indigenous to Italy.
Pasta came from China.
Yeah, and potatoes aren't from Ireland. They don't start there, you know. So you have to keep going back. There was a great, Paul Simon gets so much shit for Graceland, and David Byrne gets so much shit for stuff. And there's this wonderful thing in David Byrne's book, How Music Works, which is a fabulous book, where he doesn't ever address this picking things from other cultures, ever. But he talks very strongly about the African kinds of music and the influences they have from other places. Because there is not a culture other than the whole world, especially not now.
Yeah.
You might be able to have made the argument 200 years ago.
The thing is, though, that people enjoy cultures. So if that is the case and everything does assimilate and becomes one big gray mass, we're worried that we're going to lose Indian food, right? We're worried that we're going to lose.
I have no worry of that at all.
No?
I have no worry, because I think that me loving Sun Ra, even though I'm not African American, and me loving Lenny Bruce, even though I'm not urban and identify as Jewish, I think that loving these kind of cultures should not be based on an accident of birth.
The loving thing is one thing. I think the real fear of cultural appropriation is that people will take on those things as their own. Like, there's a gentleman, I'm trying to remember his name. He's a famous Mexican chef, but he's not Mexican. But he cooks Mexican food. He cooks it in Chicago. Walt Bayless, is that his name? Something Bayless? Rick Bayless. This guy has an undeniable passion for Mexican cuisine. I mean, he fucking loves it. He has a couple different restaurants where he cooks Mexican food, and he was getting protested, and people were furious at him because they had just decided at one point, if this guy's had a 30 fucking year career of being in love with Mexican cuisine and being like a real historian of Mexican cuisine, like where it comes from, the regions, the ingredients, like where's the best ingredients, where's the best places to cook these things, how they do it, why they did it this way. And I mean, speaks with incredible passion about this. They were deciding that he's a white guy. And he shouldn't be able to do this, shouldn't be able to sell this, shouldn't be able to, like, you fucking assholes, like, this is the guy.
Right.
He's helping everyone recognize the beauty of this much maligned food. When people think about Mexican cuisine, he is one of the rare people in Western culture that talks about it like it's 5-star cuisine. So many people talk about, oh, I love street tacos and fucking I'm a big fan of quesadillas. No, this guy's talking about the very best Mexican cuisine in the world and trying to interpret that and sell it to people and trying to turn people on to how good this food is. And yet he was taking so much shit.
When a person that wasn't born in that the accident of birth to be there falls in love with another culture, I don't see why that isn't more beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
Well, that's Steven Seagal.
Yeah.
He moved to Japan and became a master. Before he became kind of silly, he was one of the very first guys to ever teach Aikido in a dojo in Japan that wasn't Japanese. I think he actually was the first. I think he was the first American to ever run a dojo in Japan.
So now, okay, getting me on psychedelics is very easy compared to getting me to really dig Steven Seagal.
You don't have to dig him. I mean, I'm not sure I do, although I do appreciate his first movie, Above the Law. I appreciate what he... Look,
he likes his prepositions.
he's a silly fella, silly fella, for sure.
In his
but
titles.
many of us are.
Sure.
But what he did do is he learned Aikido at a very, very high level, like undeniably. And he was teaching it in Japan. He spoke perfect Japanese, and he was a very rare guy, you know. Now, you know, he became a Hollywood guy in movies and who knows what the fuck else, and became enormous, you know, physically. He got fat, and, you know, he's kind of silly now. But at one point in time, that guy was as legit as it gets.
Isn't that always true?
Yeah,
You know, always true. You know what I'm going to completely change the subject, if I may.
Sure.
You know, I want to talk about when you came on my radio show with Phil Plate about the moon
talked
landing.
about the moon landing, yeah.
Yeah, but what I think is fascinating about this, about clubs and stuff, you know, is you know, and I know I've read here and there that you've gone back on a lot of that and your conspiracy stuff and so on.
Yeah.
But that's not.
But I can explain that too. I don't know what I'm talking about. You know, this is the thing. I have zero astrophysics education. Zero. I don't know anything about whether or not it's possible to put people on the moon. I do know fuckery, and I do know teams, and I do understand when people are bullshitting people. And I think there's a lot of that with a lot of the NASA stuff, a lot of the older stuff in particular. There was a lot of manipulation of images and putting things online that may not have actually really happened because it was press releases. And there's an image of Michael Collins from like Gemini 15 that's a very clear image of him doing a simulation, like in a studio with straps and harnesses. And then someone from NASA or someone put that exact same image, blacked out the background, and used it as a photo of a spacewalk. And it's not real, you know, but they sold it as real. There was some overzealous shit like that if you're conspiratorially minded, you might say,
Once you start lying,
yes,
you know, it's
Things
like
get slippery.
the Area 51 and stuff.
Yes.
You know, we know they lied like
Yes.
motherfuckers.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. But what I just wanted to compliment you. And I just also think this is really interesting, you know. So Joe Rogan believes this crazy shit we didn't go to the moon. I know Joe Rogan. We're on a radio show together. He's a good guy. We did Fear Factor, but he believes this shit. Let's have him talk to someone who's real. So I call Phil Plate, who I don't know that well, right? But he's the bad astronomer and he knows this shit. And I say, I really want you to come on my radio show and just talk to Joe Rogan about
the moon landing.
Moon landing. And Phil says, "Oh, no problem. We'll just go on there. We'll set them straight." And I go, I just want to warn you, have your ducks in a row because Joe's really good. And he goes, "Well, Joe's a comic, right?" I go, "Yeah." And that's your problem because Joe's better at talking than you. Joe knows when the commercials are coming. Joe knows how to make a joke, and Joe knows also how to set you up and take you down. No. It'll be no problem. I said, you understand that he's smart. He's a comic, right? Yeah. Not an astrophysicist, but you understand that he's smart, and he's also, you are going into his form. We're going to be on radio. This guy has done a lot of radio. This guy's talked to a lot of people. So just have all your facts in line. And then we're sitting there because, you know, you were on the phone. And Godot, who's on my podcast with me too, sitting across from me, and we're listening. And you come in humble and charming and sexy and with perfect timing on everything. And Phil Plate starts going, I go, oh man, Joe is wrong and Joe is going to fucking win. And I set this up so that it'd be fair. My whole thing of doing this, the way I billboarded it was, I'm just going to have two guys talk from two points of view. I'm not supposed to commit. I don't know if you remember, but the whole show ends, and I go, oh, by the way, we did land on the moon. And just trying to do this final authority thing. And Phil said afterwards, well, he had, I said, yes, yeah. And it's just that idea that you can't, you know, his idea was there's the science team that's right, and then there's this goofy comic. and trying to get Phil Plait to understand that a goofy comic was not a goofy comic. And I believe that the only thing that the SATs truly test is how good you will be as a comedian. That kind of verbal, it was a wonderful thing to listen to. It was wonderful to listen to someone who I believe absolutely was 100% wrong, who was just so skilled and so moral and so thoughtful and so humble. You had everything going for you that I respect, except you didn't happen to be right.
Well, we don't know what happened. We assume that what we see is what happened. We assume that what the scientists tell us was what happened. We assume that what NASA told us was what happened. When you say, I know this happened,
right,
you're not always correct.
Exactly.
You're oftentimes correct. I know Kennedy got assassinated in Dallas. I've seen the video. I know he got assassinated in Dallas. I don't know if Lee Harvey Oswald did it. I don't know. I assume he was involved. It seems like he was.
Yeah.
Was there other people involved too? I assume there were. And one of the reasons why I assume there were was the magic bullet, the guy who got hit with the ricochet under the overpass.
But I do want you to know that I made the shot with the Mannlicher Kakana.
Oh, yeah, it could be made.
Yeah.
Oh, that's horseshit. Listen, I've talked about that in length.
And
It's
also the
100
head
yards.
goes towards that.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of things. We could, go over the Kennedy assassination. There's a lot of things. I'm not on one school or another.
Wait a minute. Are we going to solve the polarization in America, or are we going to solve the Kennedy assassination, or are we going to solve the moon landing?
All of them.
Or you want to do all of them?
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to know what our goals were.
The moon landing is a conspiracy theory's dream, a conspiracy theorist's dream, because it's got everything in place. It's got this incredible technological achievement. It's got these three guys that look incredibly nervous at the post-landing press conference, and they look all sketched out. It's got these guys that don't do interviews afterwards. It's got no one ever lands on the moon again after 1973 or whatever it was. It's got all these technological achievements, but we never get outside of Earth's atmosphere again. We're always inside of Earth's orbit. There's so many beautiful things that conspiracy theorists can grasp a hold of and go, see, it's bullshit, but it doesn't mean it didn't happen. There's the Van Allen radiation belts. There's that we never even sent a chicken into deep space and had to come back alive. There's all these things, but it doesn't mean it didn't happen.
Right.
And my problem was, and this is, and people said, oh, you've sold out, you're a shill now. And like, no. I'm just being honest now. Whereas before, I wasn't being honest with myself, and I wasn't being honest about the subject. I do not know whether or not people went to the moon. I was pretending that I knew that people didn't go to the moon, and I was arguing it that way. I was on a team. I was on team, it's bullshit, we didn't go to the moon. And you really can't do that accurately. It can't be done. You can say, this is what's interesting. This is what I find curious. This is what's weird. In fact, there's not a single technological achievement from 1969 that's not cheaper, easier, and faster to reproduce today, except going to the moon. Like, it's one of the rare things in life. Still doesn't mean it didn't happen.
Right.
Like, Occam's razor is a slippery thing because there's weird shit that happens.
Yeah.
And you got to take that into account. Like, there's no absolutes. There's not one thing that you can say, well, there is a rule, and this rule must be followed, and here's that rule. It doesn't work that way. The world is made of weird stuff.
And I'm also the idea. There's a thing that's changed. There was an article in the Times about this, and you might have even been mentioned in it. There's a playful space of conspiracy theories that it's taken me a long time to understand. My daughter is 14, and she talks about, her father did a show called Bullshit, and she talks about how she loves conspiracy theories. And this is from Paul McCartney's Dead to We Didn't Land on the Moon to all those things. But she sees it, which is so hard for me to understand. She sees it as not impacting reality, but as a playful intellectual exercise. I don't know what's going on, but there was this wonderful article in the Times, and you were mentioned there too, but there's also another guy who does it, who will do this, to use a cliche, I can't think of a better one, going down the rabbit hole of conspiracy stuff, playing around with the logic that almost feels like a mathematical thing or a pure philosophical thing or a angels dancing on the head of a pin thing. And there's a quality that you have learned that my daughter has learned indirectly, I think, from you, through other people doing this, of there is a playful space where we discuss how we share our reality that is happening in the conspiracy theory art form. And the conspiracy theory art form is now seeming to me to be more like rap or rock and roll, or it's just a form,
a thing
where you play around with this kind of thing. And I am so literal minded, I'm so verbal minded. You know, Bob Dylan's easy for me. The Stones are hard. You know, Zappa's easy. 20th Century Classical's easy, but just funk is hard for me. And it's the same kind of thing here. It's really easy for me to say we are doing the old-fashioned scientific inquiry, and this is the way falsifiable. But there is something happening in our thinking that's really interesting that I had to have my daughter explain to me, and the New York Times, after I already knew you and watched you do it.
Well, you've always been a champion of science and reason, right? And conspiracy theories, for the most part, fly in the face of science and reason. And you don't want to be a buffoon. No one wants to be a fool.
But there's a poetic thing happening.
But it's tricky. And people don't want to be a fool. Well, I'm a professional fool.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mind being a fool. And, you know, being self-deprecating and being a moron is part of being a comic. It's fun. The conspiracy theory world went south for me when I did a television show about it. I did that Joe Rogan Questions Everything show, and I spent 6-7 months doing this show, and at the end of it, I was like, okay, I get it. This is a bunch of unfuckable white guys. That's what it really is. Yeah. That's what I decided. I said, you know, I had a bit about it. I said, the one thing you don't find when you go looking for Bigfoot? Black people. You're more likely to find Bigfoot than you are black guys looking for Bigfoot. It is a bunch of unfuckable white dudes out camping and listening. What did you hear that? What is that? You know, it's like, it's nonsense. Like you're wrapped up in this idea that there's a mystery and there's a thing, a quality about human beings where we want to uncover secrets. We want to be the person that finds out the truth, because then your miserable, shitty fucking life now doesn't matter. The fucking aliens are real, man. They're here.
And you know, one of the best feelings we can get, probably better than coming, is that feeling of aha. I understand. I've gotten a revelation. And we see this all the time. Detective shows, you know, Sherlock Holmes, you know, nothing to do with police work.
Yeah.
But there is a feeling that wouldn't it be nice if in this hour I were able to figure something out?
Yes.
Because if you want to understand string theory, you're not going to do it in an hour.
You're not going to do it ever.
Exactly.
I don't think those guys understand it even if they teach
Precisely.
it.
Let's take an easier one. Let's take a candle flame. You're never going to understand that.
Right.
Studying that forever. And there's an area where conspiracy theories are exercising the muscles of logic, exercising the muscles of skepticism, playing around with the haiku of if, then, playing around with what we feel about the government and other people and stuff like that. And you're playing around with all of that in kind of a semi-safe zone. And even watching you just do it here, where you bang out that stuff and say, this is the stuff I question, what's coming out of that poetically, and let's not even talk about whether we went to the moon or not. What's coming out of your style of inquiry on that kind of thing, your style of skepticism, is just fascinating and beautiful. And I see the conspiracy thing as not so much a breaking down, which I used to see it as, a breaking down of science and reason, but I see it as rather a creation of a new form of poetry.
That's weird. I don't know if
my
I agree
daughter
with you.
my daughter just says, you know, I really like conspiracy theories. And I say to her, you know, Paul McCartney is still alive.
Right, but you know she's 14 and you're Penn Jillette, so she's rebelling. You understand that, right? You're a parent. You know what it's like.
you may have just told me something really important that I was too dumb to realize.
Thing. Here's the thing.
It's like Neil Gaiman's daughter coming in all gothed out.
Yes.
And Neil saying to her, I invented this. You can't do this. This is not the way you can rebel. You can't rebel against me like this. You can't do it with black hair and eyeshadow. You can't do it. But
yeah. Well, kids, they find their own way, and they want to express themselves. They want to exert power over their world.
But did you see that article that you were mentioning?
No, I did not.
Yeah, it was.
I try not to read anything that I'm mentioning.
Me too.
I briefly do oftentimes, and I'm like,
I try to never read anything with my name in it because it's not written for us.
Right.
And
exactly.
I'll tell you the exact moment that happened to me that was so great. It was in the 80s. We were on Broadway. And the Coen brothers were just starting to do movies, and I was really interested in them, and I had like an hour free, which when I was doing Stern and Letterman and Saturday Night Live and on Broadway, I never had an hour free. And I was a magazine, like Vanity Fair or something, who cares what it was. And it said what the Coen brothers are really like, what it's like to work with the Coen brothers. Okay. And I said, I never read magazine. I'm going to buy this. I'll learn a little bit about the Coen brothers. I went up to our office, it's like the Brill building, Lorne Michaels, and sit in my office, open it up, what the Coen brothers like, turn to that page. I said, if you want to know what the Coen brothers are like, it's like hanging out with Penn and Teller. And I went, What?
How is that even real?
I closed the magazine, put it aside, and they were going on comparing it, and I went, I have no information on this. None. There's no way I can access it. And in that moment, I went, oh, wait a minute. When it says Penn Jillette in an article or in a book, there's no way I can understand that. Maybe others can.
Right.
So when it says in the article, when Joe Rogan does conspiracy stuff, you can't understand that. It's like Mike Nesmith said to me, the major problem with talking to Jimi Hendrix was he never heard Jimi Hendrix. He never saw Jimi Hendrix on stage. He couldn't.
Right.
And, so you are the one person that using Joe Rogan as an example, kind of a proletariat, kind of he does this bro culture. This is Joe. You can't understand that.
No.
You have no idea what that means because you're an individual.
Well, it's also people are trying to encapsulate you by
Sure.
these brief moments. They might have seen a video or heard you talk about
But it means
this
something to other people.
Sure, it means something. And it also, you can easily categorize someone and put them in this box, and now I've defined that. Oh, I know what that is.
But
I've
that's
seen
also,
one of those before. It's like hanging out with Penn Jillette.
Yeah, it's
There it
also
is.
part of your job.
Yeah.
Part of your job, one of the things you've created is you've created something in the culture that means the New York Times can say Joe Rogan, and their people reading that know what that means. But there's no way Joe Rogan can know what that means.
No, you could pretend. Right. Or you could be like Trump and get mad about it. You know where the rubber hits the road with conspiracy theories right now? Jeffrey Epstein.
Oh, yeah.
That's where the rubber hits the road.
Now,
That's where people that are not conspiratorially minded are like, wait, what the fuck is going on?
Mm-hmm.
What? All the cameras were bad? Oh, the guy was on suicide watch? He tried to commit suicide? And then they're like, well, don't do that again. And then he did it. Like, if you talk to people that have been locked up, they take away everything, man. If you've been on suicide watch, they fucking take away everything. And you find this guy who's got a broken neck, and he hung himself. Like, how? How did he hang himself? Can we see the video footage? Oh, sorry, the cameras were broken.
I think hanging yourself is wicked hard.
It's not easy.
Yeah.
It's not easy. It's not easy when you're in a jail, and they take away all your shit.
Have you been to jail?
No, never been in jail.
I was only in jail overnight, but...
I mean, if you're on suicide watch, man, they make it hard for you to kill yourself. They watch you. And if you're,
is that what suicide watch means?
Yes, they watch
good,
you.
Thank you.
They watch you so you can't kill yourself again. That's the
But they
idea.
watch you every 30 minutes or something?
What the fuck was the psychologist thinking that took this guy off suicide watch literally a couple of weeks after he tried to commit suicide? If someone tries to commit suicide, and speaking as it was a guy who's had friends commit suicide, they're fucking thinking about it for years, man. Some of them, they go back and forth day to day. Some of them
just do.
Yes, some of them just do that. But when someone does actively try it, they're not going to just be fine while they're in fucking prison awaiting trial for having sex with kids.
It seems like Jeffrey Epstein's life was going to get really worse from what it was a few months before.
Could be, or other people's lives are going to get really worse because Jeffrey Epstein's now in jail and they're digging deep into his past. And, well, I only flew with him 26 times. 26 times, it ain't a lot of times to fly with a guy. I don't understand what the big deal is. We flew in a jet. We rode a bus together. He was on the back of my bike.
Do you know people that know Jeffrey Epstein?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do.
Me too. And a lot of them, it really was that.
Yeah.
Talk to him.
Well,
hung out a little bit.
There's many people that feel like he was an agent and that he was trying to compromise people. And that's one of the things about this whole Lolita Island thing is that they would compromise people. They would compromise people by having a bunch of young girls who are very sexy, who were hired to go and flirt and maybe even have sex with people, and that these people were young. These girls were like 17, underage, perhaps underage some places, perhaps not underage other places, but incredibly embarrassing. And, you know, for the people,
an agent
compromise
for whom?
Who knows? I mean, there's a lot of thoughts, but that's one of the things about when he got arrested. Was it the prosecutor or whoever it was that cut him the deal? Literally was quoted as saying, "I was told he's above my pay grade, and that he was intelligence." That's the quote.
Really? The intelligence thing?
Try to find that quote. Yeah, try to find that quote. Yes, the guy said, this was when he gave him a lenient sentence many years ago. Was it 2012 or something?
No one seems to know how he
got his money.
Yeah.
Well, the fucking $70 million penthouse that he had in Manhattan was given to him.
Right.
Given to him.
Yeah.
Who the fuck gives someone a $70 million house?
Well, I was kind of hoping you would to me.
I don't have one.
Okay.
If I have a bunch of them, I would give you one.
I got to run.
You got to go now?
I'm just joking. I was here to get a $70 million house.
Oh, you were told wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the guy, look, I've talked to people many times that work for intelligence agencies. And there's a lot of weird shit that they do. And one of the things that they do to compromise people is they get them involved in weird stuff that could be very bad for them if it comes out. And then they have influence over this person. And if you got a guy with a voracious sexual appetite, I mean, there's a few of those fellas out there. And, you know, hey, man.
You're very proud of that, aren't you?
I'm out of office now. I'm just fucking hanging out, having a good time with Jeffrey. And we're just flying around. I mean, come on, man. It's highly likely. One of the guys that I know that knew him was also a freak, like a sexual freak. And I'm like, okay, I think I see a pattern here. It's very likely that that's what was going on. This guy was compromising people and probably absolutely a sex addict himself. And I believe all the women that say all the horrible things that he did to them and hired them for things and had underage girls do sexual things with him. It's probably true. It's probably true. He's probably a fucked up, twisted dude. But many people that are involved, even in good things, get compromised. Like there's many people that work for the CIA that were legitimate CIA operatives who wound up selling drugs. There's a lot of this happens. People go sideways. People get involved in shady activity that are cops. There's cops that wind up doing illegal things. They signed on to be a cop, to be a person who's going to serve and protect and be involved in the community, and slowly but surely they get compromised and they get involved in illegal activity, and the next thing you know, they're corrupt. It happens. It happens.
It does.
To people.
It certainly happens.
And then sometimes people fucking suicide themselves. No
and the
big deal.
people that I know that knew him, it was they weren't even aware of the seedy stuff going on. So, and of course, that's going to be true too.
Well, he was
not going to be 100%.
He was also a champion of science.
Yeah,
I mean,
big champion of science.
And but that's the thing about people; they can be really good in some ways and horrible in other ways. This idea that people are binary or 1 or a 0 is nonsense.
Yeah,
there's really good people that do terrible things. There's really terrible people that also do good things. You know, like, look, fucking Trump just passed something, and no one wants to give him credit for this.
Kidney stuff.
What's the kidney stuff?
He did wonderful stuff for kidney transplant stuff.
I'm sure he did.
Pushed through.
Well, I was going to say that he absolved all the student loans for disabled veterans. Mm-hmm. Fantastic. I love it. You don't hear a word about it, a word of praise. Look, we should absolve student loans for fucking everyone. We're crippling kids. We're crippling the 17, 18-year-old kids who sign up for these fucking loans, and they get compromised to the point where we have people to this day right now that are getting their Social Security money. Their Social Security money is getting docked because they owe student loans. They're at the end of the fucking road.
But what do you do? What do you do? And this is a real question. This is not rhetorical. What do you do about the feeling of fairness? The people that work their way through college, waiting tables.
That's a good question.
Working really hard, and then they. Do we just say their feelings, which I think is valid, which is, yeah, you got fucked on this, but let's help someone else out. What about the compassion?
Here's the
because
difference.
There are people that worked really hard to not have student loans.
Yes.
And there are people that took them. There has to be somebody who took them frivolously.
100%. I think quite a few, and I think it's also. We also should pay attention to the human mind and the development of the human mind in the frontal cortex. I mean, the frontal lobe does not develop properly until you're 25 years old. Right.
Or somewhere in that range. Plus or minus 4 years.
It's definitely not 17. It's definitely not 18. No. So you're taking on these fucking loans. You can't be trusted with money or your future or thinking about what the fuck you're doing in terms of like taking on a debt of hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Don't we have to, and this also ties in with sexual stuff as well. Don't we have to decide when someone's adult and then give them that respect?
Yes.
Don't we have to say, you're 18 years old, we can't control what decisions you make?
Yes.
I mean, and when is that year going to be? Because I think 25 is too old.
I think 25 is too old as well. Yeah. But I think what we're saying is, I mean, look, there's a lot of 18-year-old people that make very good moral decisions.
Yes.
And we should praise that. Here's the problem with the student loan thing in terms of it's the only loans that you never get exonerated from. You can get bankruptcy, right? And you can get exonerated. You could escape the loans of credit cards, the debt of mortgages. You could escape a bad business collapsing and owing millions and whatever. You could escape that through bankruptcy. You cannot do that with student loans. It's a corrupt system. You take a child who's trying to learn a trade or trying to learn a profession, and you acquire insane debt that's going to track you and cripple you for the rest of your life. And no matter what happens to you, you owe that money.
But also, you're taking your colleges out of the free market too, by giving those loans easily.
Yes.
And by having government help.
Yes.
You're also taking away the free market.
Yes.
Because, we found out that when you put the free market in, like LASIK surgery, when insurance doesn't cover it, it gets wicked cheap. And if colleges had to be paid as people went without easy loans to get, and if colleges did not get government money, they might be wicked cheaper.
I think they would be cheaper.
Really, really expensive.
I think
crazy expensive.
Yes, crazy expensive. I think the real solution is in treating education like a thing that's going to make our society better, and think of it as the same way we think about the fire department, the same way we think about police department.
But don't you think that? I mean, when you read the paper, there's always one whole thing about colleges getting too expensive and people can't go. And then you turn 20 pages later in the paper, and there's an article about how online learning is happening, and how all this stuff is going to happen. Do you think that idea of college is going to hold up for another 10 years?
I think there's an experience that people have
did you
when
go
they
to college?
go away. I did, but I went to college in my town. I went to UMass Boston, and I really only went because I didn't want to be a loser. I mean, it was really all it was. I was doing martial arts and fighting and traveling all over the world, or all over the country rather, and thinking about doing stand-up at the time as well, and then transitioning to doing stand-up while I was also still taking classes. I was learning nothing. It was a complete waste of time. I was only doing it so I could say, yeah, taking classes at UMass Boston. I was barely paying attention, barely showing up. And it was just a thing that I didn't want to tell people that I wasn't going to college. Like, that was the number one reason why I did it. But I had a unique life from the time I was, graduating from high school to the time I started doing stand-up. I was obsessed with martial arts and competing. And that's all I wanted to do was make the Olympic team for Taekwondo. That was my goal, and that's what I was trying to do. So I wasn't a normal person. I wasn't going to go to Ohio and fucking travel over there and take a full course load and not be able to pursue what I wanted. What I wanted to do was...
And also you've got a window,
athletically.
Yes. Athletically, that's fairly small.
There was no scholarships for Taekwondo. It didn't exist. And the only other option was the Army. There was a dude, I think his name was Clay Barbers, this really talented guy who was a fighter who was on the U.S. team at one point in time, I think, and he was competing through the Army. Like they had subsidized his training somehow or another, and I was thinking maybe I should join the Army. Like that was the only other thing that I was thinking about doing. But for people, I think there's a thing about getting away from your parents, getting away from them, getting away from their influence, being wild and crazy, and be with a bunch of other kids and trying to find yourself. And I think that comes from traveling to a place and going to college. And I think there's some benefit in that. I have friends that have had great benefit in that sort of transformative experience of being on a campus, a physical campus in a place that's outside of their hometown, where it gives them this new experience where they get to try to reinvent themselves.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. People do that. Being able to be someone else.
Yeah.
But I wonder if all of that, why are we giving that a 4-year period? Why isn't that our whole lives?
It could be and should be.
And isn't that the way that's going to change? Because people aren't having jobs for their whole life anymore. And by the way, the liberal arts education was never supposed to teach people a trade.
Right.
It was always supposed to make it so that young men could talk at parties.
Yeah.
That was the idea. We could have the same cultural thing. We can talk about Shakespeare. We can talk about this. We can talk about that. But none of this was meant to give people jobs.
Well, it's so rigid, right? You get out of high school. High school is this torturous affair where you're being a square peg they're trying to shove into a round hole. Then you get out, and then they fly you off to wherever the fuck you're going to go to school. And you go there, and you're forced with this overbearing workload of school and then social things. You're trying to figure out what's okay and what's not okay now. Where's the safe space? And well, am I allowed to say this? And am I allowed to say that? And what are the new rules now for this new generation? Or are we really going to change the world? And then all of a sudden you're out in the world and you realize that fucking money that you spent or that loan that you got is not getting you a job, and you're fucked. And you can't get a job, and you're also massively in debt and severely depressed and trying to figure out your future. I mean,
and then you go on Adderall.
And then you're like, I get it. We're setting people up. We're setting people up for a horrible failure. I am with Bernie Sanders in that I think education should be free. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think you should earn it. I think you should have to earn it.
How about if education is really cheap, like everything else is getting cheaper?
Well,
I mean,
think
TVs are really cheap.
I think we could
Why
pay for it with taxes.
Why is education more expensive?
I think we could pay for it with taxes.
Or
I may be wrong.
Or the individuals could pay for it.
Maybe the individuals
if it
could,
cheap enough.
if it made sense. If it made sense, yeah.
I mean, if you want to learn something now, we know this very well. If you want to learn anything now, you can get it for free on the web.
You definitely can.
You definitely can.
Many things.
I mean,
other than physical things. There's a lot of physical things that you need to be taught by a coach.
Yep.
But I think there's a lot of things you can learn online. And even the physical things, you can get a big chunk of it from online tutorials.
Let's talk about all that matters, okay? Let's talk about juggling. You know, I grew up as a juggler. When you were doing the taekwondo, I was juggling all the time. That's all I did. And that was my whole life, was juggling. And what happened was, with the internet, juggling got tremendously better, because people could watch videos of things they knew were possible and get better. If juggling can get better, physics certainly can. Yeah. It seems like you can take a course at any college online, and if you sincerely want to learn, you know, I don't know if we need to have this. What is the term called when the Amish take their 1 year of
Rumpelstiltskin or some shit? Was it? Rumspringa.
I don't think we need a nationally tax subsidized Rumspring for every person in the country.
That seems like what it is, right?
Yeah. You go to college, what you just described.
Yeah.
You do the It seems like live your fucking life. There isn't this 4-year magic period or this 2-year magic period, and go out and learn the stuff you want to learn. I mean, we both have children, and they'll be talking about going to college, and of course, my wife will push very hard for college. And my thinking is, anything they want to learn, they can just learn it.
Yeah.
And by the way, this was also true with just the libraries in local towns.
Yeah.
It's just more true now. It's even easier now. I can't imagine growing up where my son can type in Lenny Bruce and it all just pops up.
Right.
I mean, that was amazing.
Record store.
Order it.
Yeah,
because they didn't.
Yeah.
Gribbin's Music Store in Greenfield, Massachusetts, did not have the Carnegie Hall concert right there in the stacks.
Yeah.
I had to order. Frank Zappa, on back of one of his records, mentions Lenny Bruce and he's on Sergeant Pepper, I guess I should learn about him. Lenny, write that down.
That's how I learned about Terrence McKenna. I learned about Terrence McKenna from listening to a Bill Hicks record.
Yeah.
I was like, who's this McKenna, and what's a heroic dose?
And Frank Zappa, one of his records, I forget which it is, I think it's Freak Out, but it might be absolutely free, says on the back, do not listen to this song until you've read Franz Kafka in the Penal Colony.
Oh.
I got the record, opened it up. It said that. I listened to one side, got to that song, got on my bike, rode down to the Greenfield Public Library. Kafka, I got this written down, Kafka, in the Penal Colony. Sat there, read it, went back, listened to the record. My entire education starts with Mike Nesmith of the Monkees, who said, listen to Zappa, listen to Hendrix, from Zappa to Lenny Bruce, from Lenny Bruce to the whole world. And I believe that that is available to everybody all the time. I mean, I don't know, as I would say, taxpayers should pay for college. I think I would say, do we need college? Isn't that fading away?
I think there's a real benefit to being in a classroom with a brilliant professor.
Yeah.
I think there is.
But we're also seeing with TED Talks, which I know are jive, but there's a
Did
longing
you say
there.
you know their jive?
I mean, there can be a lot of jive TED Talks.
There's some jive TED Talks.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is, I went to one of the first TED conferences and got to hear, all these credible people speaking. It was mind blowing, and I wasn't college age. I was whatever. I was 45 or something, 40, and it was an amazing experience. Jonas Salk, I sat and listened to Jonas Salk talk.
Really?
I've been in a room with brilliant people speaking, and it's really, really great.
Yeah.
But I think we can deliver that cheaper. And that's the side of Bernie Sanders I want to talk about. It's not, can we give endless amounts of money to these fucking people on college campuses? Can we pay them all the money in the world to take our children and give them something to do in between smoke and dope? Could we rather just say, can't we make this experience cheap enough so that anybody can go and experience it? Why isn't it possible for you, for a few bucks, to go and be in a room with a brilliant person?
I think that would be a thing that would be beneficial to almost anybody at any point in time, instead of the rigid structure of this is, you have to get all this work done by X amount of time. That's the other thing that happens to kids too. They're taught about having no sleep and about beating your body up and about cramming and about getting all this work done in a short period of time. We're really preparing them for a horrible job.
And all this shit that doesn't work.
Yeah.
All that weird kind of hazing shit that we do for medical professionals. You're going to work for 48 hours. What the fuck? It never works.
Insane. It's
never
terrible for the
works.
patient.
It's bad for everybody.
Yeah.
So and you just made the argument about the frontal cortex and you're not really ready till you're 25. I mean, one of the huge advantages I had in my life was a shitty education. Horrible education. I went to a bad public school that had an influx of hippies from UMass that came in and experimented on us. So we had no education whatsoever. I graduated from high school on a plea bargain. I had very good SATs, so I had scholarships to wherever I wanted to go, but I chose not to because I misunderstood Bob Dylan. I didn't know he was lying, so I went and hopped trains and hitchhiked around and lived homeless for a couple of years. And I never read Moby Dick till I was 45. Thank you. If I'd read Moby Dick when I was supposed to at college age, I wouldn't have gotten it. But I was able to get it at the right age. And now it's my favorite book because I was ready for it, There's so many things that are on the curriculum that are very, very important. Maybe not that day.
I think there's also an issue with people not thinking of education in terms of like that it's a lifetime pursuit.
Sure. Yeah.
It's not something that you graduate from college, then you're done. We really should be educating ourselves throughout life.
Sure.
Not just accidentally or incidentally by experiences. We should do it because there's things that we pursue that are interesting.
Yes.
And now is one of the greatest times ever to do that because of audiobooks. You can do it while you're in the car. You can do it while you're on the train. You can get educated
And you can also, they're doing this weird connecting thing where I've not experimented with this, but I'd love to, where people take courses online and then find people who are also taking courses online in their communities, and then meet at like a fucking Starbucks to discuss what happened before in the class, which is mind-blowing that can happen. So you can take, one of my one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to learn to play jazz. I wanted to learn to play upright bass. I took that up at 45, and I learned to play upright bebop bass passively. Huge accomplishment. And now I really want to learn a language, So I was looking a little bit because I figured maybe there's a government watch list I'm not on. So I should learn Arabic. That was my thing. Because don't you think that ticks all the boxes? That's going to give me everything if I just learn Arabic.
Yeah,
so I started
Arabic would
looking
do it.
into how I can learn Arabic, and it's amazing the kind of network that's developing all over the world to be able to learn anything. So my argument with you on the Bernie thing of paying for everybody's college is I think we can get college so fucking cheap you can go to college your whole life.
Well, I don't think that's a bad idea, if it's possible to get college that cheap, but I don't want professors to be poor. I mean, I think one of the real problems we have with public education is that people don't want to be a teacher because teachers don't get paid much.
Sure, but there's a way. I would say that's government intervention that's doing that. I would say if you
government intervention is keeping the salary low.
I think so.
Really?
I really think so, because I think that we're not having enough of the competition and stuff there. I mean, you would pay good money to be in a room with Steven Pinker,
Yeah, sure.
And I think that locally, this was always a problem that I never figured out. When I was in Greenfield, Massachusetts, town of 20,000, I would say to all the other high school students, I would say, if we didn't give our money to the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and Dylan and all these other bands, we could pool our money together and have a really good local band. We could have a great band right here in town, And I think that if you thought of education that way, can't we get in our little area really great teachers who can teach this stuff? It might be pretty boss.
Well, it would be amazing if we could spread education, right, through any method, whatever we could do. We could encourage people to be more educated. But I think that one of the best ways to do it really is just, look, there's a lot of podcasts that are educating people.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of information that you can get
Not
that's in
mine.
entertainment. But what we're getting is there's more information available now than ever before. I think it's very different than what college is traditionally. College is a thing where you go and it's a rite of passage. It's like, and we don't have those in this world. And I think we could do with them. I think we could do with these rites of, particularly for young men. I mean, maybe it's the case for young women. Obviously, I never was one. But when you're a young man, there's this transitionary period where you're a boy, and then all of a sudden, am I a man yet? Like, when am I a man?
Certainly, a lot of cultures and religions have done that.
Well, getting
and we've
out
thrown
and
it
getting
away.
that certificate and getting your diploma. Holy shit! I graduated from fucking university. I'm a man now. I'm a grown up. I have a degree. I'm a woman now. I have a degree. I'm an adult.
And you're obviously, I'm seeing this. It's okay to speak with an accent. It's not okay to hear with one. I'm hearing that from someone who spent an awful lot of time explaining to myself and others why I didn't go to college. You wanted to show you weren't a loser. I didn't have that. I didn't say, I went to Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Greatest Show on Earth Clown College. You know what I mean? If you want to make sure you don't get respect, that's where you go.
Well, I'd say I talk about it just because I want people to really know where my head was at. I don't want to glorify where I was when I was in college.
I went without any rite of passage at all.
Right.
And the closest I had to a rite of passage was earning my living.
Well,
which was huge.
You were on a different pursuit. Like your pursuit was the carny pursuit.
Yeah.
You enjoyed that. I mean, there was you had a lust for it.
Yeah.
And it obviously worked out well.
It did okay.
Listen, you really have to bail it too because it is 2:00.
Around now, yeah.
Okay.
Around now.
All right. What are you doing? You just hanging out?
No, I'm going to go. Do you watch this show, Perpetual Grace Limited?
No, I never heard of it.
Okay.
What is it?
Did you watch the show Patriot?
Nope.
Okay. best shows I have seen.
Are they fiction?
On television? Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Not The Patriot, not Mel Gibson, but a show called
What's
Patriot.
it on?
Patriot is on Amazon Prime.
Remember when there used to be like 20 shows?
Yeah.
And you knew all of
Yeah,
them?
now there's millions.
It's impossible.
So I am going to meet and talk to the guy who created all of those things.
Oh,
It's,
okay. Cool.
And,
There it is.
oh, I talked about
Perpetual
that.
Grace.
Yeah, Perpetual Grace. There it is. Right
Oh, okay.
there. And
I know that dude.
Yeah.
What's that dude's name?
That's Ben Kingsley.
That's right.
And then that's Jimmy Simpson.
And that guy to the left is Jimmy Simpson?
Yeah.
That's who that guy's great. I never knew who that guy is.
Yeah.
He's just always awesome.
Yeah.
What was he in recently? He was in something really good.
Westworld, I think.
That's right.
And,
Westworld.
Steve Conrad is the guy who writes, directs, produces, creates these shows. And he happens to be in town, and I'm going to talk to him for my podcast, which is Penn Sunday School. And I'm going to go to another studio and talk to him, and I'd already set up the time, so
Nice.
that can't be changed. But
I
he's,
love that Amazon's doing all these different shows. They're getting into the stand-up comedy world now, too.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah,
huge
it's
amounts,
great.
huge amounts.
It's beautiful. There's so many There's so much stuff, but there's so many places to put that stuff.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
Beautiful.
And wow, what a great time. We got to do this more often.
We got to do this more often.
Yeah.
This is the first time we've done it. How's that possible? This podcast is almost 10 years old.
Yeah.
This is the first
crazy,
time you've been on.
Crazy. And also because people yell at me
That's the
on
other
Twitter.
crazy thing.
Go talk to Joe Rogan, you asshole.
This- Hello, ladies and gentlemen.
Magic hat on, and you're transported to these different.
$79 with your first purchase. So get yourself into a daily routine with Athletic Greens. Head over to athleticgreens.com/Rogan and claim this offer today. 20 free travel packs valued at $79 with your first purchase. You can also claim this offer in the UK and in Europe using the same URL. That's athleticgreens.com/Rogan. Go get you some. Please go get you some. My guest today is one of the godfathers of video games, one of the most important figures, really, in the history of the first-person shooter. He was one of the top guys behind Doom and Quake, and he's a true legend in the world of video games. Please welcome the great and powerful John Carmack.
Joe Rogan Podcast, check it out.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan Podcast by night, all day.
Here we go. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good.
I'm super happy to have you here. If there's a Mount Rushmore of video games, you're George Washington. You're up there.
So this is great. People have been kind of nudging us for years and years to get this done. So it's great that we're finally able to make it happen.
Yeah, I have been from day one a gigantic Quake junkie and a Doom junkie. So for me to have you in here is a giant treat. And everybody, I've talked about your video games and your creations so many times on this podcast. So it's very cool to have you here. And thank you very much for showing me, before the podcast got started, I should tell everybody, you showed me the latest and greatest version of Oculus Rift, which is amazing. It's so small. For people watching the YouTube, this is the entire unit. This thing that sits on your head, it's very light, and it's not attached to a computer. Like, you don't have to carry anything around. And there's no extra. Everything is in here.
Yeah, so this is the Oculus Quest, the standalone device, and it's been kind of the culmination of a bunch of different products that we've been working on, and it's the vision that we had even 6 years ago, just the idea of not connected to anything. You put this magic hat on, and you're transported to these different worlds.
And this is
it's all
available
coming
right
together.
now. Anyone can buy this, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's available. Jamie just actually pulled up
Great.
the website. Can I push this up to you? Pull that? Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
What is the battery life on these things?
So it depends on what you're doing, where if you just sit there and watch Netflix, it'll last a little more than 3 hours. If you play some of the really hardcore games, it might only last 2 hours or so.
Do you have numbers on how many people are watching Netflix on this thing?
So our previous one right before this, the Oculus Go, was a little bit more media focused, and that's one of our more popular applications. I mean, surprisingly, everybody thought that VR was going to be all about these just amazing gaming experiences, but some of the most popular experiences are doing reasonably conventional things, watching Netflix, watching YouTube, Amazon Prime, stuff like that, where if you're like if you're you and you've got a great home theater and everything, there's not this much benefit to having a theater like that in VR. But if you're in a situation like you're in a tiny room in Tokyo or something, the idea of being able to put on the VR headset and have this like lovely ski lodge atmosphere with a giant screen TV, it has some real benefits. So in the end, VR should be a replacement for anything you do on screens today, whether it's your phone, your tablet, your TV, your laptop, your PC. All of these should eventually be superseded by just having more flexible screens in VR. I mean, we have lots of challenges now with resolution and comfort for long-term use, but this is the direction that everything's going. Not only do you have things in VR that you couldn't do anywhere else, just experiences that you can't have with that level of immersion, but it should pull along every other thing that people do with screen devices today.
I didn't consider television shows, but of course people would be watching Netflix on this if it's possible. Have you done the Disney World ride, the Avatar ride, Flights of Passage?
No, I haven't done that yet.
It's amazing. You sit on this, it's like a motorcycle looking thing. It straps you in place, and it's supposed to represent one of those flying dragon things in Avatar. And then you have the headset, you put that on, and the virtual reality experience is second to none. I mean, it's incredible. Super high resolution, and the motorcycle's moving around. You get wind and smells and all these sensory...
Yeah, so that's one of the really interesting things. Like, I think about that whenever I am at amusement parks for things like the Harry Potter rides and stuff like that, where they're doing...
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. How
their heart's content, port a response better, each of it to get in, jostle you around that you can't do in VR. You've got things like smell and like the Void, where they have the Star Wars experience there. We have a fantastic Star Wars experience on Quest, which in many ways has a lot of that magic, but in the Void where they set it up and they blow hot air over what's the virtual lava towards you, that's something that you still don't get. But it's kind of like the age-old battle of what can you do differently in an arcade that you can't do as good in your home system. And VR now lets you do all of these amazing things there. But if you're willing to spend millions of dollars and build a theme park attraction, essentially, you can still throw some of these extra things in. People joke about when is smell-o-vision coming to VR, and there have actually been real companies that have spun up to say it's like, well, we want to do scent augmentation, but it's not a great thing. And those are still the last vestiges of things where you have to go someplace. But the promise of VR is to, the world as you want it, not having to go to someplace to do something magical. And if you can get to 90-something% of that experience staying in your own room, then that's great.
What would they be able to do with smell-o-vision? Would you have like a standalone unit that like has access to the program? So like if you were flying over orange fields, it would spray citrus in the air, sort of like soaring over the world. Have you ever done that Disneyland ride?
Yeah. So somebody literally did make this where they made a little box that that glued or attached to the underside of the head-mounted display. And one of the interesting things about scent, as opposed to like audio or video, with video everybody knows that you just make red, green, and blue colors. You can mix them in any way and make all the colors that we can see. Smell isn't like that. Our nose is actually a receptor for a whole lot of discrete different molecules. There's no way to mix up smell like the way we do with light to make red, green, and blue primaries with that. So they really had to pick, okay, here's the dozen or so smells that we're going to have with this. And it would just sort of spritz it out on a little blast of air very close to your nose, so it doesn't need much of it to get in.
So if you really wanted to do some sort of a jungle experience with, thousands of different smells of plants and dirt and all you would have to have like some enormous unit that's spraying these various things.
Yeah, although I suspect that at least modern people in modern society do not really have that discerning of a level of scent. Like if you took some Peruvian indigene or something, that they probably would complain. It's like, oh, the fidelity on this is garbage. I should have 500 different smells here and I only detect 5.
Right.
But you take, a normal city person and you just 3 cents of jungle is probably going to be more than enough to sell the experience.
Yeah, the guy in the jungle will be like, this is sterile urine. Yeah. This is not real. So what is this, Jamie? Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. So this is something she's holding.
No, she's pulled it off. It attaches to the headset right here.
It says "Feel Real."
Yeah.
Sensory mask. So it's a sensory mask that smell virtual reality. Oh yeah. It simulates hundreds of smells to immerse you in the virtual world. Wow. Of course it's coming. But why am I shocked? Look at this guy. He's got like a little cartridge. He's popping in there. With all the,
it's like refilling your toner cartridge on your ink.
Wow. Reliable scent generator. How hilarious.
But yes, if you have to rank your senses, that's not in the top 2.
Yeah, and it's probably going to be clunky like the earlier versions of VR where you got that low resolution sort of thing. I remember my friend Duncan, he's a huge technology freak, and he had a really early version of the consumer virtual reality headsets, the early Oculus. And I remember putting it on going, oh my God, even though it was really pixelated, I'm like, this is a game changer. Like
that sense that you've seen the future.
Yeah.
You put it on, it's like, it's not here yet. But that's the ability to just project a little bit past the flaws there and say, okay, well, we're going to sort this out. Over the next several years, we'll get higher resolution, we'll get the response better, and you can imagine what it's going to be.
Yeah, it's pretty stunning. And what you just showed me today, the Star Wars one, is actually higher resolution than the Void, which is the one that you pay to go see, or that you go into the warehouse and everything. I've done that several times. The Void with Star Wars and then the Void with Wreck-It Ralph, which is pretty cool too. It's really fun.
Yeah, but the physicality of having the actual props there is the magic of being in there. It's like you pull out your Stormtrooper blaster and you heft it around, and that's really something versus a lot of times when you're just using the controllers to pretend you're doing things, you feel like you're a mime someplace, some French mime kind of pretending to do things, and that doesn't sell the experience. And that's why, my favorites are the things like Beat Saber, where in the game you are swinging this lightsaber sort of thing through things. So your actions in reality are exactly what your actions in the virtual world are. You swing through it. There's a little bit of a buzz as you cross through it, and it just feels like you're projecting yourself there.
Now, what about the possibility of a haptic feedback vest or a suit or something you could put on your body?
So there's the interesting things all the way back into the Doom and Quake days. I remember one of the really early kind of entrepreneur guys that came by. He had made this leather jacket with all of these impact pucks on it, and it had like 8 or 9 different things that were these solenoids that could deliver a pretty sharp thud, and he wanted to get support added to the games for that. The idea you play that, and when you're getting shot, it actually feels like you're getting hit in the back.
Ooh.
And I didn't think that was a very likely mass market consumer thing. I mean, not too many people want that level of fidelity where it actually starts making you sore. But that's one of the wonderful things about being able to open source the various codes after the games are a little bit older, where anybody that wants to can nowadays go and take Doom or Quake or those earlier titles and program in for whatever crazy thing. They don't have to convince someone. They don't have to go convince skeptical John Carmack that this device is going to be a worthwhile thing to add support to the mainline code. They can just go do it, which is a wonderful thing.
That is very cool that you guys do that. I think that's really cool. And
yeah, that was one of those things where early on, as you can imagine, that was a tough sell in the company, where the people that weren't coming from the sort of hacker ethic background on the programming side, you get the business people and the artists and the designers, and they're like, we want to just give away our source code. Won't that be a leg up to the competitors? Why do you want to do this? And it was one of my, it made me really happy when many years later, Kevin Cloud, one of my early partners, told me that, yeah, in retrospect, that was really the right thing to do. And it's great with Doom and Quake now, especially Doom, where anything that has a processor runs Doom. If it's got a 32-bit processor and it can conceivably display an image, people have ported Doom to it, and that code will live forever. 100 years from now, people will be able to dig up and run the Doom source code in some emulator.
Yeah, that is very cool. Now, what was the conversation like? Like when you were saying, hey, this is good for the community, this is good for games overall, it's going to get people excited about it, it's just going to generate more business. Like, how did you sell it?
So it's an interesting path there where in our earliest games, I can remember that some of the very first things that happened with Wolfenstein 3D before Doom, where that was not set up to be easy to be modified. We were still back in those days of fitting on floppy disks, so I had all the data compressed in this non-standard thing that I just made up at the time. But people dug through all of that, disassembled the code, figured out how it worked, and started making some level editors and doing the things like, replacing Hitler with Barney and all these early mods. And we were all like, well, this is fantastic. This is people taking the game, they played through the game, they loved it, and they loved it so much that they want to keep doing things on it. And they wind up breaking into the game at that time, essentially, to figure out how to make new things. So by the time we were working on Doom, it was an explicit top-line technical goal for me that, okay, I had these graphics things I wanted to do, I wanted to do networking, but I also wanted to really make game modding a first top-level feature. So we added all this ability to do the WADs and PWADs, and we documented all of it, and we released a lot of the tools, the early source code. So here's how you go ahead, and it was much harder at that point with the more sophisticated stuff going on, but here's how you build a level in Doom. And we even released the code for our level editor, although that didn't help the community that much because we were using these crazy expensive Next workstations, and other people had to take the steps to go ahead and make them run on PCs. But the step beyond that, when we were looking at Quake, so I knew that I wanted to enable actual changes of the gameplay, because in Doom you could swap out all the different models, you could swap out the way things looked, the way things sounded, and some people would go in and actually patch the executable to do a few minor changes in gameplay. But the next step clearly was allowing people to really make whole new gameplay modes. So that was how Quake got this Quake C extension language, and we wrote a lot of the game in that, and that led to all the things like Capture the Flag and Team Fortress and all those, which
Rocket Arena.
Yeah, all these really, really great things. But there were still things that you couldn't do or couldn't do effectively there, and that's where there was still this desire to be able to say, well, what if we just gave them everything? What if we gave them the full source code and let them sort of hack to their heart's content, port to other platforms? And again, it wasn't a super popular decision, but the way I was pitching it was, well, it still helps our titles. It still gives them life. It gives them life after they would have been off the shelf, falling off of people's radar, just falling into some game of nostalgia. But being able to let people make real new versions of it would be, it would keep them current. It would keep them relevant. And so the pitch that I ran for years there was, after our new game came out with brand new technology, then we should be able to open source release the previous generation. So first, when Doom was out, we released Wolfenstein. When Quake was out, we released Doom. And when the later Quakes were out, we released the Quake 1 code. And that worked out really remarkably well. I know at the time there were some people in the company that are just like, this is just John's thing, and they were not really happy about it, but I was in a position where I could kind of throw my weight around a little bit that, and I was happy that I did it, and in the end, everybody agrees it was a good win. I'm a little sad that more companies weren't able to take that final step. Modding was embraced broadly by a lot of game companies, but only a handful of companies were able to really go the entire way and release full source code in the years since.
That's too bad, because that is one of the cooler aspects of the Quake community, is that, you guys did release that stuff, and there were all those cool extras and things you could download, and maps. So many different maps that people had created that were really interesting. Like, I remember one was a guy's apartment. Like, you could play Quake in an apartment. Like, you could get to the top of the toilet and shoot at things off the toilet. It was really amazing. How did you feel about when people would play the game competitively and they would turn all the textures off?
So that especially is a sore point with the artists that have labored for years to build these glorious textures, and then you get the people that just turn them down. And there's two reasons to turn them down. You turn them down to help performance in some cases. In the early days, and especially the early graphics cards, you would get higher frame rate if you turned them down, so you'd have less latency in your response times. But there's also the even more nefarious thing about turning them all down to improve the contrast on your enemy acquisition. So people want this almost flat shaded world so that any moving set of pixels there just turn and fire at that. And that's, I never came to really great terms with that, where I always thought in the early days of esports and gaming, we did always insist that people have to play with at least plausible resolutions there, because we want our game to look good. We want people that are looking at it for the first time, seeing these professionals play it. We don't want them to look at that and say, well, this game looks like garbage. It's all flat shaded or blurry. And luckily computers got fast enough that people could start playing at the frame rates that they wanted, even with the full textures running in it. But the whole pace of doing the kind of the esports and the competitive gaming was very interesting. We saw the dawn of that with Doom, but it's been pretty surprising. It's been amazing the state that it's gotten to today, where I remember when we did the Quake Red Annihilation tournament, I gave away my first Ferrari as grand prize, and I was thinking,
Really?
this is just the most over-the-top thing. This is going to be unmatched for years, and it was only a year later that there was some other tournament with a $100,000 prize coming out. So that went much quicker than I expected, and then today you have just the amazing celebrity of the top pro players. It's great to see the path that it's taken.
It really is, and it's very interesting to see that they're now like legitimate sports stars, and they make a ton of money. Whereas if you were a kid 10, 15 years ago, your parents would tell you you're wasting your time. This is nonsense. Why are you playing these games? But now you have a legitimate opportunity to be a professional game player.
Although there's a hazard there where
what's this, Jamie? What are you pulling up?
Top earners this
Yeah.
year compared to the top Tiger Woods, how much he won in the Masters, and the top Indy 500 earner.
So
in
Tiger
Wimbledon.
Woods won $2 million in the Masters. The top Quake players won $3,121,872. Well, it's not Quake. What game is that?
Dota. They
What is that? What's Dota?
It's a
What does it
different
stand up?
game than Quake, but it's very popular right now.
What's it stand for? I've never even heard of it.
it's a Valve game. It's a MOBA, massively online battle arena game where you're directing all the different little characters down there, and that, along with especially League of Legends, even beyond that, not as popular in the United States, but is just amazing overseas, where if you look at the numbers for things, people think, oh, the Super Bowl, like the height of all competitive sports, whatever. And a lot of these esports games, especially in South Korea, they dwarf those numbers.
Really?
And
They
some people
dwarf
are
the
just
Super Bowl.
not aware of this, where you just get millions of people tuning in.
And enormous arenas, too,
Yeah.
right? They play in these gigantic places with huge. Look at this. Oh, my God. Look at this arena. That looks like 30,000 people. That looks like a UFC event.
A lot bigger than UFC events.
Is
for
that
things.
one?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure.
I don't know about that one in particular,
Well,
but
the
they have
biggest-
some really enormous ones.
Biggest UFC event we ever had was 55,000 people.
Yeah, they've been well over that.
That's crazy. That's amazing. It's really cool to see. And these games, particularly Quake, they are unbelievably difficult to master. And it's one of the more fascinating aspects of like video game play and addiction is the complexity. Like when you would watch, do you remember Thresh?
Oh, yeah. Thresh was
yes.
the one that won my Ferrari in that first
did he?
Red Annihilation tournament.
Cool. That guy was the hero back in the day of early Quake play. He was just this, Kenneth Fong? Is that his name?
Yeah, or Dennis Fong.
Dennis Fong. There he is.
Yeah.
There's Thresh. And I remember I would watch demos. One of the cool things about Quake was that you could, is that his Ferrari? You won the Ferrari? Let me see that.
Yeah, so that was my old Turbo 308.
Now, you
328, sorry.
turbocharged your Ferraris too, which I want to get to as well, which is pretty crazy. But so this guy was like the first real killer in Dennis Fong. There you go. First real killer in the Quake playing games, and you would be able to watch him play on demos. You would play through his eyes, so you would be able to see like how he does things and move around. It was really cool.
Some of the interesting things about Quake, where it wasn't really so clear when we were designing it, but it is a brutal game, especially in one-on-one, where a lot of modern games are much more approachable, where if you followed a lot of the Quake games, a lot of them were just blowouts, where you would get somebody that would take control of the level and they would be running their pattern, denying anyone any foot in the door, and you'd wind up with these 20-1 blowout games, where there are things that you can do in game design to make it more approachable, where like if you don't have health packs where you can keep, because in a game like Quake, you go in, as long as you come out on top in the fight, you've got this little window to run around and bring your health back up. So even if you're only 5% better, you might win every engagement because you have enough time to go back, get yourself back up before you wind up re-engaging. Where in another game, if you didn't have health that would you had the ability to bring it back up, then even if somebody didn't win, if they knocked you down a whole lot, then they might get you the next time around, and scores can be much more even.
That makes sense.
Quake gameplay winds up brutal, tending towards blowouts, and very frustrating for it did not have the approachability for new players, where a lot of more modern games, things like Overwatch, can be jumped into a lot more easily, because team play is another aspect of that, where if you've got a team, you could be on the winning team even if you suck, because you might have really great players that are kind of covering for you there. You can jump in and have the chance to say, yay, I won, even if you didn't contribute at all. And you might wind up doing something. You start off being completely useless, and then you slowly work your way up to being able to contribute effectively for your team. So I can recognize some of these things now about ways to make games more approachable, but the kind of brutality of Quake there was it was a taste that a lot of people really did like. Wasn't so much explicitly designed for that, but it worked out that way. And that's one of the interesting things as we look at game design today versus the old days. A lot of people fall into a sort of nostalgia trap about saying, well, the games I grew up with were the greatest games ever, and you see it with music and movies and everything. And I tend to be much more optimistic about the state of things today, where the amount of effort that goes into the modern games is extraordinary. Just the detail and all the quality on all the different levels. But there is a little sense of games are so expensive to make now, sometimes in the hundreds of millions of dollars, that they do have to be conservative. So they have to be careful to make sure that they've got something that has a broad mass appeal. And I think that is the upside of some of the older games, where they might have a little bit more of a distinct flavor. They weren't sort of focus group to death in the way that some of the more modern games can be.
That's interesting. Yeah, focus group to death, I'm sure, is a problem. The Quake blowouts, although that is a thing, it's so fun when you're the person blowing the other person out that it's worth learning the maps. And that's for people who don't understand what we're talking about. Quake would have, it has maps. And on those maps, this is where the rocket launcher is, this is where the railgun is, this is where the health is, this is where the mega armor is. And you had to know where these things were and that they would regenerate every X amount of seconds. And so you're managing not just your fighting, but you're also managing the resources. So you're running around and trying to control the map and trying to control the mega health and trying to control where the armor is, and don't let the guy get the railgun, don't let the guy get the rocket launcher. And in doing that, it's this incredible game of strategy as well as fast twitch aiming, and there's so many factors going on.
And the masters would have it timed such that they're just running to where it's going to spawn, and a half second before they get there, it respawns, they run over it, it's theirs, and it's gone. And the difference between the top-level players is something you see in competitive games a lot, even today, is you get the sense of the big fish in the small pond. It's like I totally beat all of my friends' asses, or I'm the best player anybody's ever seen in my tiny little area. And then you put them in the big pond, with some of the professional players, and they get nothing. They wind up not being able to land a shot. There is that much difference. Of course, you see that in everything. Martial arts, where you get the dojo hero in one place that then goes in and actually rolls with a professional and just finds out that they weren't all they thought they were. And there's even more layers of that in games because you're not so confined to some of the physical limits of the human body.
Yeah, and the amount of time you can do it is not confined to the physical limits of the human body. So there's people out there playing 10, 12 hours a day where they're thinking and sleeping and dreaming and, catching people with rail shots in the middle of the air.
Yeah, that sense when you're obsessive about something, how it does invade your dreams. And there have been a number of times in my career when I'm learning new things, when I'm just immersed in whether it's a new programming paradigm, a new piece of technology, and I'm working 13-something hours in a day, and I go to sleep and I have dreams about what I'm working on. That's when I know I'm really deep in the groove of soaking in this new information. And the dreaming is my mind helping synthesize this into a useful form so I can apply this in the future. And those are some things that I look back on very, very fondly when I've been that obsessive about something that it's soaked into my dreams.
Yeah, I used to get that with martial arts. When I was competing, I would throw kicks in the middle of the night. I would have dreams, so I'd be moving, and I'd wake up and thinking that I was in the middle of a fight. And I had a real problem when we have this LAN room set up here with Quake on it, and when we got into it where my addiction got re-sparked again, we were playing 2, 3, 4 hours a day, I was starting to have Quake dreams. It was really weird. I'd have dreams that I was going down corners and dodging rockets, and it's just, that game is so immersive, and it's so you get done with it, and your heart is pounding. Like me and Jamie and Jeff would play, and then when it was over, we would all be out of breath. Our heart would be racing. We'd have to get up and walk around. We'd be like, Jesus, try to shake it off.
So that's one of the real interesting things that gets amplified even more in virtual reality, where When I was doing a bunch of the work on bringing Minecraft into the Gear VR system, I played a bunch, and I would play with my family, and it's great when you can have your kids playing with you. And I would have the VR headset on. I'd be playing in my swivel chair, turning around, running, and I had this really weird sense where there were times that I would remember that not as I was playing a game, but I remembered being there. I remembered like being in that cavern and breaking through into a raining sky, or having the creeper run up behind me. And it was not the sense that I remembered playing a video game. I remembered being there, and that's the power of VR. And in many ways, we don't have as intense of action games like Quake in VR, partially because there's a movement control problem where in VR, you're fine as long as you're moving in the virtual world the same way your body is in the real world. But if you go ahead and played a traditional game like Quake and you were moving your mouse to spin you around, you would get really sick to your stomach quickly because parts of your inner ear detect motion of your physical body. And your brain correlates what your eyes are seeing with what your inner ear is telling you. And when they disagree, that's what causes simulator sickness. Now, some of the theories are that that's your brain saying you ate something that's really bad for you and you should get sick and throw it up. But this idea that you can't play traditionally like that in VR unless you've just got an absolute iron stomach. So things like that, the dashing down corridors, flipping around in corners, you don't do very well in VR. But things where you can either stand still or move sort of in a straight line, as long as there's no acceleration. The worst things are sort of parabolic arcs. So rocket jumping and stuff in Quake is bad news in VR. It's still pretty amazing when you go do it, but you do it too many times. No way you're doing that for a 3-hour stretch there without having some problems with it.
So what you're saying in terms of the inner ear and the visual, what you're taking in visually is that when those things are off, your brain thinks maybe you consumed poison, and that's why they're off?
Yeah, that's one of the theories, because it makes your stomach upset, and people do throw up sometimes. People used to do that even just with traditional video games, where I remember in the early days of Quake and Doom, some people would be staring intently enough at the screen and they would get that sense where on a small monitor, it's usually not a problem because usually you see the rest of the stable world around you, and the field of view that you pick, like traditionally we used about a 90-degree field of view in the old days. And if you have a little monitor here, it's really only taking maybe 25 degrees or so of your field of view. So your brain doesn't really buy it as I'm looking into a window in this other world. You're still kind of controlling something and driving it around. But when you get a giant screen and you get the field of view about right, then your brain starts picking up and saying, oh, maybe I should be paying attention to this visuals. And that could cause some people to have, get simulator sickness even on a screen. But in VR, where it's covering your entire field of view and you don't have a stable reference, it can be a much bigger problem. So we have some of these Band-Aids where people would put cages of things in virtual reality so you've at least got something stable to look at. And that helps a little bit. Like there's a game called Omega Agent where you're flying around in a jetpack. And on the one hand, this is the worst thing to do in VR, parabolic flight. It checks all the don't do this in VR buttons. But it's still really amazingly cool to just jetpack up and kind of coast around down things. So sometimes you're making these trade-offs with your body on the VR experiences. We try to push people towards the no trade-off games. Okay, you can sit here, you can do this amazing thing, and there's no downside to it. But for the adventurous, there are these other things you can do which might be exactly what hits the right buttons for you, but you may suffer some for it.
Do you guys take into account the possibility of people getting sick and suing? Because I think you kind of have to, right?
So there's a lot of what we were more concerned about health and safety wise is on the new system where you can walk around is, people banging into walls, falling down steps and so on. So we spent a lot of effort building this. We call it the Guardian system. When you start up, you basically trace out what you say the safe area is. And that's on you. If you trace out the safe area over your staircase, bad things can happen. But the idea is that it has a known good area. It knows where you are. So it will tell you, it'll bring up this little overlay to show you that, hey, you're approaching a wall. Do not be charging headlong. Now, people should not be sprinting in VR under almost any circumstances. But you do wind up getting into the action on things, and something sits behind you, startles you, and you jump around. So you need a reasonable amount of space to do these. We call them room scale games, where you're actually walking around. There's a lot of them that are stationary, that you're expected to pretty much stand still. But there's some amazing experiences about being able to clear out a room, walk around, and just not be on task as far as hyper aware, but just being able to soak in a space and kind of crouch down and look at things. And I always like to say that modern games have so much artistry put into them that is largely wasted or lost on the players, where you have the fire extinguisher sitting in the corner that some artist lovingly crafted for a week, and you just glance at it, see the pixels, and move on. But in VR, you wind up saying, it's like, oh, I'm in this room, I'm looking at this. You lean down or even pick something up and turn it around and look at it. And, and that's really great. But the larger spaces have these hazards. And it turns out that it's hard to protect people from themselves in some cases, because we started saying, well, what if somebody's swinging their hand really hard? We want them to be able to stop their hand. And even if we show when the hand is really close to it, they're not going to have time. So we put in this predictive filter to say, based on the velocity of how fast you're moving your hand, maybe we'll start showing up the boundary a second earlier. If we think you're going to hit it in a second, we'll show the boundary now. But then everybody says, oh, I don't want that flashing up. It's distracting me. And we need to put in parameters to turn it down. And it's a real balancing act there, where a lot of developers just kind of go in and say, turn off Guardian. I'll accept the risks for this. But
wow.
Yes, of course, the lawyers are very concerned for this. We have some duty of care to the people that are our customers. There are some interesting YouTube videos of people playing VR, not setting things up right, and like running into walls and so on. And even internally, it's if you don't set it up right, if you extend it further than you should, there are people that have smacked their knuckles into a table or something and kind of post the bloody knuckles picture from that. But it's on you on how conservative you want to be with it.
It was interesting when I stepped outside of what is it called? The Guardian?
Yeah.
Whatever it is, the matrix that shows up, and you walk through, then you see the regular world. Like, you step out of the virtual world and you're into the regular world, but you're seeing it through this weird lens.
Yeah, so it's black and white because it's using the same cameras. Like on the Quest, there are 4 cameras that are pointed off in different directions, and they have 2 jobs to do. They track where the headset is by looking at the world around it. They find stable little pieces of the world, and based on where they are as you move around, it can figure out where the headset is. And then they also look at the controllers, and the controllers have little invisible IR LEDs on it. But it takes this black and white image of the world from the 4 different views, and it can pass through the real world. It's pretty low res, doesn't have color, but it's good enough for important things like finding where you put your controllers and letting you orient yourself. Because depending on what you do in VR, if you spend a couple hours in an environment where you're turning around and moving, it can be very shocking to people when they sort of come out of it and they're in the opposite corner of the room they thought they should be. They're pointed in a different direction. Having the ability to kind of bring the world into place, especially in those cases where you're approaching the boundaries, it's nice.
Is there anything that you guys have that can, or maybe in the future can, map out uneven terrain? Like, say if you were at a park and there was a hill, or in your backyard or something like that, where you have various sort of surfaces. You have a sidewalk and then grass and then a hill. Is there ever going
So there's a few aspects to that. You can set up really large Guardian boundaries. We do have an upper limit on it, but again, some developers have disabled that to do even larger areas. And one of the coolest experiences that I had was at a convention last year. An artist had made basically a VR sculpture that was really big. It was like 50 feet long. You were inside this kind of aquarium-looking thing in a workshop, and we sketched out this giant boundary, and I walked around. Like, I walked literally from room to room in virtual reality. Again, very few people have the space to set something like this up in their house, but we were at a convention center, and the ability to walk through a door in virtual reality, get down on my hands and knees and crawl through a crawl space into another magical little area, that was really something. I mean, it's not clear how we can carry that over to other people, but the idea of doing it outside, there's a few technical issues with it where bright sunlight overpowers the little tiny LEDs on the controllers. So while it's possible to sort of stop down the exposure on the cameras for tracking the headset, if it's reasonably bright, you're not going to be able to resolve the controllers, which breaks some things. But people have found that if you get the right overcast day and you've got the right environment, you can go out to like a tennis court or a big field or something, stretch out a large boundary, and explore some fairly sizable things. Now, really accurate determination of the world. Facebook Reality Labs has done a lot of research for almost what is the absolute limit of what we could possibly do with the sensors for building the most accurate representation of the world. And it's pretty damn good when you get to the point where they could take even a really cluttered room like this, scan the world for all of this, and they could make real 3D representations, so you could then be good enough that I can go ahead and pick up individual things here. But it's still, it's pretty expensive to do that, both in terms of they need some slightly different sensors. They have to project more structured light out into the world. Takes a lot more calculation to do it. It's too much for this generation of products here, but certainly that's something that we're looking at in the future, where eventually we want to not have that one step of drawing out the Guardian. You just want it to be both sensible enough that it can tell what's going on in the environment and sort of smart enough to tell what's a hazard, because you want that magic of you just put it on, it does everything, and it just works. We're not there yet, but that is sort of on the roadmap for where we want to go.
So you think there will be a time where the technology will allow you to maybe possibly have several filter layers, like you can see the whole world and it would be more of an augmented reality sort of a situation, or the whole world disappears and then it could be virtual?
Yeah, so we have a lot of debates about both the useful things that you might do there and then some real technical aspects where, in terms of augmented reality, this idea that we all buy into this future vision of a world where you've got something that's that feels like sunglasses that you put on and you can pull up all your information and maybe it clouds over into a virtual experience. There are still fundamentally unsolved problems in display technology to do the magic thing that we would really like from all of that. So you step back to saying that, well, what you saw in Quest when you saw the world through that, obviously it's low res, it's low frame rate, it's not good, but we could fix all of that. You could say, let's go high res color, high refresh rate, and you could make we'd call that a pass-through rather than a see-through augmented reality system. And we could absolutely build that technology, and we could make that pretty good. But then it comes down to, what do we expect sort of the user story to be? If you had something like that, would you be wearing this boxy thing out into the world, riding the bus with it, doing different things? We have a little bit of a hard time seeing the kind of socially acceptable way that you're running around going about your life with sort of the shoebox size thing on your head. It's an open question where everybody agrees if it came down to sunglasses, everybody in the world is going to want something like that if it gives them these magical abilities and it can turn into virtual reality or augmented reality. It's an open question whether there's an in-between layer. If we get down to the point where it's something like swim goggles or very thin sort of ski goggles, something that's half or a quarter of the volume of what we've got here, would that be something that people would want to wear for long periods of the day? I lean towards no, but we haven't built it, so we don't know yet. And then the question of what you want to do with that in the augmented reality world, where people make these interesting little demos where, all right, we've mapped the world in this incredible detail. Now we can flood it with water. We can do a simulation of all of this. Isn't this cool? Or we can turn it into, we can reskin your world as Bilbo Baggins' Hobbit hole or something. And I am skeptical of the broad utility of a lot of these things where, like today, there's a ton of AR apps that you can get on your cell phone. You can hold your phone up and kind of look at things and interesting little things happen. Well, Pokemon Go is an interesting thing where that actually has more of a point for it, and the augmented reality side of it is very small. But the things that actually augment onto the world, I haven't seen anything that I've found really compelling. They're interesting technologies, but I think that I'm still betting more on the fully immersive experiences where you take over. And this idea of bringing part of it into the world, I'm a little more skeptical on, but I don't know how it's going to play out.
Well, that's the concept behind Magic Leap, right?
Yeah.
And Magic Leap was very, very hyped up a couple of years ago, but it hasn't really come to fruition yet in terms of like a